You went into that meeting believing the conversation could change the outcome. You prepared, you documented, you waited for the right moment, because somewhere in your model of how this works, the meeting was where the decision got made.
And then your manager said the number, and your brain went quiet for a few seconds, and you said something like, "I appreciate you letting me know," and the meeting ended. The number didn't match the work, and you couldn't explain why, because the meeting wasn't what you thought it was.
In most structured organizations, companies large enough to have salary bands, HR governance, and formal review cycles, the raise conversation is not a negotiation. It is not an evaluation. What it actually is, what it has almost always been, is a confirmation ritual. The organization arrives having already confirmed what it will allocate. You arrive having prepared a case for a decision that was made before you walked in.
And the format of the conversation, the questions, the apparent openness, the discussion of your contributions exists because participatory processes are more stable than ones that feel imposed. The format serves the organization's need for a smooth confirmation, not your need for a genuine hearing.
This is also why your manager could sound completely supportive in every one-on-one for 6 months, genuinely mean it, and still deliver a number that didn't reflect any of it. Think about that dynamic for a moment, because most people interpret that gap as insincerity or weak advocacy. It's usually neither. The support was real, the constraint was separate. Those two things can coexist, and in most compensation cycles, they do. Your manager was telling you the truth about what they thought. They weren't telling you the truth about what they controlled, possibly because they didn't fully know either. Compensation decisions in these organizations are made in a process that runs parallel to the performance review cycle, but is not the same thing. Calibration meetings close before individual conversations open.
Budget allocations are finalized in discussions between managers, HR, and finance that employees are never part of. By the time you sit down across from your manager, your number or the narrow band containing it has already moved through approvals you didn't know were happening.
The primary constraint in that process is not your performance record. It is organizational stability. This doesn't mean performance is irrelevant. Performance determines where you land within an allowed range. Whether you receive 2% or 4% within what the system has already decided is available for your level and band. But the existence of that range, its size, and whether exceptions to it are possible, those are determined by variables that have nothing to do with your self-assessment. Most employees spend enormous energy building the performance case. The performance case operates inside a structure it cannot change. That structure is why your manager can genuinely agree with your assessment and still approve a number that doesn't reflect it. If your raise pushes you significantly above a peer doing comparable work at the same level, the organization now has an equity problem. Resolving it requires either additional spend or a precedent that complicates future distributions.
So the manager who privately believes you deserve more approves a smaller number, not because they're inconsistent, but because they're solving a different problem than you thought they were solving. They are not asking, what does this person deserve? They are asking, what can I adjust in this team's pay structure without triggering a cascade I can't control? That is why strong performers often hit the hardest ceilings. Consistent performance tends to move people to the top of their salary band faster. Once there, moving further requires a reclassification, a change in job level involving HR approval and implications across the job family. The friction isn't about your value. It's about what the raise would structurally signal. At the top of a band, a raise doesn't just compensate you, it reclassifies something, and reclassifications require justification upward in a way that ordinary annual increases don't. Meanwhile, someone hired 8 months ago may earn more than you for equivalent work, not because the organization values them more, but because they were priced at current market rate and you were priced 3 years ago at a lower number. Every annual increase since has been a percentage of that original figure. This is the loyalty penalty, and it persists because of a specific asymmetry: replacement cost. What it would cost to hire someone for your role today is updated continuously because recruiting happens continuously and market data is available.
Internal compensation adjusts slowly through annual cycles in bounded increments. The gap between what you cost and what you would cost to replace widens steadily.
Organizations know this happens. It continues because correcting it requires a one-time exception above the manager level, and long-tenure employees are statistically less likely to leave the newer hires. The organization is continuously repricing your departure risk downward as you stay.
Longevity produces drift. It does not produce reward. Now look at the language used when the answer is no. We'll revisit next cycle. There's no budget. We value you. You're important to the team.
These phrases have a function that isn't primarily informational. They are stabilizing. They allow the conversation to feel bilateral, like your input mattered, like something is being considered, while the actual decision was made earlier elsewhere by a process you weren't part of.
The vagueness is not carelessness. Specificity would require explaining that process. Explaining it would reveal how little the conversation changed anything. Vague language keeps the ritual intact and keeps you oriented toward next cycle rather than toward departure.
Most employees hear that language and conclude their manager didn't advocate hard enough. That interpretation is usually wrong. The manager's operational job inside a structured organization is stability and predictability.
A manager who consistently delivers compensation surprises in either direction creates problems for their department. The system selects for managers who operate within the process, not around it.
When your manager expressed genuine support and the outcome didn't move, they were almost certainly doing exactly what the system is designed for them to do. The gap between their expressed belief and the actual number wasn't dishonesty. It was the distance between what they thought and what they controlled.
Here is what the system actually responds to. Performance documentation tells the organization how you have been performing. Raises are retention decisions. These are not the same process, even when they are scheduled to look like the same conversation.
The system responds to departure risk. A manager's core operational incentive is team stability. Losing a member creates instability, recruitment costs, onboarding time, productivity gaps, and the risk that a replacement costs more than the current employee.
When the organization believes an employee is likely to leave, the business case for a compensation exception becomes internally defensible in a way that performance documentation alone almost never creates. The approval pathway that didn't exist becomes navigable.
This is why external offers produce outcomes that internal advocacy rarely does. An external offer doesn't change how the organization feels about you. It changes the organization's model of your departure probability.
When that probability shifts, the retention math changes. The exception becomes justifiable upward, and budget that wasn't available becomes available, not because new money appeared, but because the conditions for accessing existing discretionary budget changed.
That discretion was there before the offer arrived. The offer changed the conditions under which the organization would use it. Timing works through the same logic.
A compensation conversation before the budget cycle closes can influence what gets allocated. The same conversation after calibration has run is informational. The window closed before you spoke. Most employees don't know when calibration happens or when the allocation pool finalizes. So they have conversations after the window. Experience what feels like unresponsiveness to a strong case and interpret it as the case not being good enough. The actual variable was sequence. The case was never the constraint. The employees who receive raises without extended campaigns are generally not the strongest performers on the team. They are the employees whose departure would be disruptive, visible, and difficult to explain, whose absence would create a problem the organization cannot absorb at that moment. The system moves for them not because their case was better articulated, but because their departure registers differently in the retention calculation. Understanding that distinction changes what the meeting means. The organization arrives knowing what it is allocated, but it needs something. The performance review, however thorough, cannot tell it. Whether you understand your position well enough to stay, or whether you are becoming a flight risk that requires action. That is what the meeting is actually for. It is a signal detection event. The organization is reading for one of two signals: acceptance
or instability. Your documentation confirms your performance. It doesn't change the allocation. What changes the allocation is when the instability signal becomes credible enough that retaining you costs less than replacing you.
Most employees walk into that meeting trying to answer one question: why do I deserve more? The organization is listening for the answer to a different question entirely. What are you going to do?
You thought you were making a case. You were being observed for a signal in a conversation specifically designed to look like the kind where cases get.